Working? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Last week we were in the chapter in Umdatul Fiqh, Bab al-Ihram, and this week inshallah ta'ala we move to the next chapter, Bab محظورات الإحرام, the chapter in relation to the violations or prohibitions while in the state of Ihram. And before going there, we want to just review what we mentioned last week about the types of Hajj. And there's also some questions that came at the end of the class about the differences between them. So we said last week that when it comes to Anwa'ul Hajj, the types of Hajj, there are three: Hajj al-Tamattu', Hajj al-Ifrad, and Hajj al-Qiran. And each of these types of Hajj has certain rules and differences in terms of what the person intends and also what a person will do when they're performing the Hajj. So we said Hajj al-Tamattu' is the best one, in which a person makes the intention to perform Umrah first. So they make the Ihram for Umrah when they are passing the Miqat. And then when they finish their Umrah, all the rites, they get out of the state of Ihram. That's why it's called Tamattu', because you enjoy yourself in that which is prohibited during the state of Ihram because you're outside of it. Then on the 8th day of Dhul Hijjah, you enter into the state of Ihram again for Hajj. So here you have two Ihrams, one for Umrah, one for Hajj. We also see that when he's doing the Tamattu', he will also have to complete the Umrah and get out of the state of Ihram, which is different than the next two. Hajj al-Ifrad, the scholars, they mention when someone is going for Hajj al-Ifrad, which means Hajj only, this is their Ihram, their Niyyah, when they're entering at the Miqat. And so their intention then is that they're only going to perform Hajj. And so when the pilgrim, he reaches Mecca, he performs Tawaf al-Qudum, and we're going to see. He performs the Tawaf of arrival. And he performs the Sa'i, these two actions. And then he doesn't do anything else. He doesn't get out of state Ihram, he doesn't cut his hair, he doesn't trim his nails, none of this. He stays in the Ihram until the beginning of Hajj. Why? Because when he entered, his niyyah is Hajj. And what is he going to do? He's going to perform the Hajj. But what he did when he got to the Haram, Tawaf al-Qudum and Sa'i. And we're going to see in a second the next one, Hajj al-Qiran. A person, when he reaches the Miqat, the Ihram with the niyyah is Hajj and Umrah. This is one way. We said there's two surah or three surah, right? Three versions. So Hajj al-Qiran, since there's three ways, the first way, when you're passing the Miqat, your niyyah, your intention, because that Ihram, the ma'na is niyyah. It's very important. Ihram is not the clothing, it's the niyyah. The clothing comes with the niyyah, the intention. Your intention is Hajj al-Umrah. And then he'll do exactly as what the person Hajj al-Ifrad does. He gets to the Kaaba, there's the Tawaf al-Qudum, the Tawaf of arrival, then the Sa'i, and then after that he waits for Hajj. The second way we said someone can do Hajj al-Qiran is that when he's passing the Miqat, his initial intention, Ihram, is for Umrah only. But when he gets to the Kaaba, before he starts that Tawaf al-Qudum, he makes the niyyah for Hajj. So what is he doing differently? When he's passing the Miqat, what's his Ihram? What's his niyyah? Umrah. But when he gets to the Haram to do the Tawaf, before he begins, he has the intention that this Tawaf is for the Hajj and the Umrah. It's for both. So in this case, in that moment, he's saying, what I'm doing now is for Hajj. So he has the niyyah of Umrah before, and then he has the niyyah of Hajj now. So then he did both. The first version, he made the niyyah from the beginning. But this one, he starts with Umrah, then he adds the second niyyah. That's what the ulama are talking about, the adding part. And they say this is permissible because a person, at the end, he has Umrah and Hajj. He intended both. And at the end of the day, if he intended both, فهو Qiran. Qiran means to join. The third method was one the ulama differed. Was someone, when he passing the Miqat, his intention is Hajj. And then when he gets to the Kaaba to do Tawaf, or he does at the end of his Hajj, when he finishes all of the Hajj, then he does the intention for for the Umrah. That one they disputed because they said that one, are you allowed to enter the smaller Hajj into the bigger one? Can Umrah enter into Hajj? They disputed, and we said some scholars say it's permissible, but it's better to avoid that third method. يعني خروج من الخلاف مستحب. من القواعد the ulama mention often, especially if you're going for Hajj only one time. You don't want to go where there's a gray area. So the قاعدة الفقهية, the fiqh maxim, الخروج من الخلاف, to exit yourself out of difference of opinion, which is a strong one. In this case, very strong, because many, the majority say it's not valid, the minority say it is. Mustahab, it's recommended. So it's better to do either one of the two versions. If you're doing qiran. All of these methods, then, you have a Hajj, al-tamattu' wal-ifrad wal-qiran, all of them are legislated. The difference between them then has to do with what? What a person will be doing. If you're doing tamattu', you're doing umrah separate Hajj. So you're doing different actions. If you're doing Hajj tamattu', you're going to do hadi, you're going to have a sacrificial animal. If someone's doing Hajj al-qiran, and it looks the same as Hajj al-ifrad in terms of actions. The difference is in the niyyah. Because the person doing Hajj al-ifrad, what's his niyyah when he passes the miqat? Only Hajj. Or the other one, he starts with Umrah, then he get Hajj, or Umrah Hajj at one time. Hajj al-qiran, there's a hadi, there's a sacrificial animal. Hajj al-ifrad, there's no sacrificial animal. That's wajib, only mustahab. So at the end, you could say then, Hajj al-tamattu' and Hajj al-qiran, there's a wajib sacrificial animals, obligatory to sacrifice. As for Hajj al-ifrad, no sacrificial animals, wajib, only recommended. Hajj al-ifrad wal-qiran have the same actions, they differ in intentions. Hajj al-tamattu' different in action and intention. Because he's doing, and what he's doing is altogether different. At the end, all of this, the ulama explained just to show the difference between them, but at the end of the day, a person has a choice to do any of them. But the ulama say if someone is coming outside of Mecca, he should do a tamattu', that's the best one. If someone is in Mecca, then usually the ulama say he does al-ifrad. We also want to mention something else, which is that when we say al-ihram means niyyah. And then there's a talaffuz and the talbiyah. So if you go back to last week, something that comes up and can confuse people. The Shaykh, when he talked about entering the state of ihram, and then he talked about a person verbalizing the statement, make the talbiyah, labbaik Allahumma labbaik, right? And also to make the statement or verbalization, talaffuz, when he passes the miqat, Allahumma labbaik bil hajj or umrah. Is that the niyyah or is not the niyyah? This is an important point. Is that the niyyah or is not the niyyah? That is not the niyyah. A niyyah is always in the heart. When you pass in the miqat, it's recommended to say out loud, Oh Allah, I am performing hajj or hajj and umrah. This talaffuz, this wording you're using, it's mustahab, not wajib. And number two, it has nothing to do with what's in your heart. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, in one of his fatwa, mentions a nice benefit. Why do we verbalize at that moment and we don't do it for other acts? He said, number one, it's al-ikhbar. No, it's not al-ikhbar al-niyyah. It's not informing your niyyah. What you're doing here is the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فهو dhikr, it's a dhikr, separate. And number two, if you forgot to do that, the miqat, are you still in hajj? Are you state of hajj? Are you still in state of ihram? Yes, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. You see, for example, now someone's passing the miqat. He has the intention to do hajj. But when he passed the miqat, he forgot to say, labbaik, Allahumma labbaik umrah or hajj. He didn't say that, he just passed it. In his heart, he's going to do umrah hajj, but he didn't say nothing. Is he still in state of ihram? Yes, because he has the niyyah. See, what happens to you when you mix the two, then you get confused because you think that what I say is my niyyah. Look at the wording when you're going for hajj. Are you saying out loud what's in your heart? No, you're making a special dhikr. So to differentiate the two, the niyyah, al-ihram, it means niyyah. And niyyah is always in the heart. As for the talbiyah and everything else you're doing in the tongue, but that's a different action. That's mustahab. Okay, and the reason why the ulama differentiate the two is because some people, they passed the miqat, they forgot to say that. They didn't make the talbiyah, they didn't pronounce out loud. Right? They're coming to Allah at a service. They're still in hajj because they have the niyyah. Versus somebody passed the miqat and he didn't say nothing nor intended anything. And that person is the worst case because that person is not even intending. So that person has to penalty. One more thing, the ulama, when they talk about the difference between qiran, al-ifrad, wal-tamattu', they talk about the hadi, right, the sacrifice. As some of the ulama explore, why are you giving a sacrifice, a sacrificial animal, when you're doing al-hajj al-ifrad and hajj al-tamattu'? And they say that this is out of gratitude lillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, not every sacrifice is for penalty. So there's one that's for jibran and one for shukran, they say. This is for gratitude. Why? Because the one who did tamattu', he did umrah and hajj. The one who did qiran, he intended umrah hajj. Since he has intended or he did a umrah, he thanks Allah by doing a sacrificial animal. As the one who only did ifrad, he missed the umrah, he didn't do it, so he doesn't have to unless he wants to give a sacrifice. So this is what some of the ulama mentioned, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen and before that other scholars, are showing gratitude. And this is a helpful way to understand when we talk about, right, the sacrifice, this is out of gratitude for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So tayyib, inshallah, it becomes clear then when someone, whatever version of hajj is going to be doing, that he does it the way that's prescribed, and that we pay attention to these differences. Now the Shaykh, once he talked about all the recommended adab of ihram, now he goes into the chapter about the mahdurat, the prohibitions. Issue 1003, he says, وَهِيَ تِسْعَةٌ, and there are 9 of them. And this, the ulama arrived at it, بِبَابِ الْإِسْتِقْرَاء, by way of induction or inference. They looked at the Quran and Sunnah and they found only 9. Only 9. Based on the evidences. And we'll see that there's some of them, there's a little more detail to it. Before continuing, when the ulama talk about the violations or prohibitions in the state of ihram, they divide it into different categories. And so here he's going to talk about what they are, but you could categorize them in different ways. So maybe we'll give 2 categorizations, and then, or 3 of them at least. And it's good to understand the categorization. You can think about prohibitions in 3 different ways. One categorization has to do with which of the violations will nullify your hajj and which don't. That's the first category. Some of the violations nullify the hajj and some they don't. Okay, that's the first category of the violations, where you can divide them. A second way of dividing the prohibitions or violations is in relation to if someone did it on purpose or by accident. So bi'tibar fa'il, in relation to the one who's doing it, by accident or on purpose. The third way of dividing the prohibitions is in relation to the fidya. Is it going to be a penalty, a fidya, a sacrifice, or a kind of expiation, or no expiation? So what do we have now? 3 categories. Category 1, prohibitions in relation to if it invalidates or doesn't invalidate your hajj. Second category, the person, if he did it by accident or on purpose. And why is that important? Because someone did something by accident or forgetfully, it's not the same like the one who did it on purpose. And the third category, in relation to the fidya, what kind of expiation do you give for the violations? There's different types. So ultimately, when a person knows this, he has to be mindful of that. The good news, though, is that if someone did something of these by accident, as we'll see, or out of ignorance, or he was not aware, or he forgot, there's none of this. Doesn't apply to him, the prohibition. And that's the rahmah of the deen, right? So let's first cover the violations. As much, maybe we'll do the first 4, 3, 4. Let's see how much we can get done. Inshallah. So he says, issue 104, al-awwal wa-thani, the first and second one. So the first one and the second one. So we'll start off with, he puts it together, number 1 and number 2. حلق الشعر, which is to shave the hair while in the state of ihram. That's the first violation. And the second one that follows, issue 1005, وَقَلَّمُ الظُّفُرِ. وَقَلَّمُ الظُّفُرِ, which means to clip the nails. So now we see 2 of the violations while in the state of ihram is to cut the hair on the body and to trim the nails. So now, the ulama, when they use this terminology, cutting the hair, what does it mean? The hair of the head, the hair of the beard, body hair. The ulama, they discuss it by dividing into categories, because you have to divide it into categories to understand. But the origin for this is in the Quran. In Surah Baqarah, ayah 196, وَلَا تَحْرِقُوا رُؤُوسَكُمْ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ الْهَدْيُ مَحِلَّهُ. And do not cut or shave your heads until the hadi, the sacrificial animal, reaches its due position. So here is the origin for the issue at hand. The second proof for this is Surah Hajj, ayah 29. ثُمَّ لْيَقْضُوا تَفَثَهُمْ وَلْيُوفُوا نُذُورَهُم. So Allah talks about it, then you complete tafathahum. Tafathahum here, one of the tafsirs, it means removing the body hair. For example, the hair under the armpit or the pubic hair and the likes. So based on these two verses, Surah Baqarah ayah 196 and Surah Hajj ayah 29 is the origin for when the state of ihram, you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be shaving the head or taking from the head hair or the body hair. That's the origin for it. But then the details, the ulama then differed. Because the head, we can see clear text, but the second one, it's based on a tafsir that there are multiple interpretations. So to make it easier, we divide the hair into three categories. So make it easier. Category 1, shaving or cutting the head hair. The hair on the head. This one, there's no doubt, is from the prohibitions of Hajj بِاتِّفَاقُ الْعُلَمَاء, by agreement. Because the ayah in Surah Baqarah mentions head. And the Shaykh said, حَلْقُ الشَّعْرِ, shaving. What about trimming? They take the same ruling. So the head hair, that one's بِاتِّفَاقُ الْعُلَمَاء, not allowed on the state of ihram. You cannot do that. Category 2, taking from the hair of the body, or taking from the hair of the body, which is generally recommended by the Sharia to do so. Like someone plucking the hair or cutting the hair under their armpits. The Sharia tells us, or trimming the mustache for the men, this is something which you're supposed to do. But in a state of ihram, it's also a prohibition. Due to the ayah in Surah Baqarah. Okay, so because they say that even though this is recommended, due to this ayah, it's not allowed. And the third category is hair, the rest of the hair on the body. Any other hair on the body. And we're going to see here, the Shaykh is going to give us some details when one doesn't count. So the rest of the body hair. And likewise, this would be also something from the prohibitions due to the generality of the verse in Surah Baqarah, but also the tafsir of Surah Hajj, ayah 29. So ultimately, someone should avoid all of that. All of that. So the body, the head hair, the recommended hair to cut, and all the body hair, you shouldn't touch it during state of ihram. And we're not talking about someone did it by accident or forgetfully. We're not talking about that. We're talking about purpose. Because someone knows it's not allowed. Now the ulama say, how about someone, instead of shaving it, because Allah says, وَلَا تَحْرِقُوا, don't shave. But if someone plucked it, someone trimmed it, they say then it falls into the umum, the generality of the verse. So that also counts. So if you plucked it, or you shaved it, or you trimmed it, while in the state of ihram, all of that is the same. Because the ayah is general. وَلَا تَحْرِقُوا رُؤُوسَكُمْ. It's general, so it says it falls into the general idea of removing. So that's the first one. Then the Shaykh says, issue 105, وَقَلَّمُ الظُّفُرِ, and trimming the nails. Here, trimming the nails, the ulama, they differed. They differed on it. Because it's not as clear cut as the first one. It's not as clear cut as the first one. So some of the scholars, they say that it counts. And some of them, they say it doesn't. And where did they get this from? So they go back to Surah Hajj, ayah 29. ثُمَّ يَقْضُوا تَفَثَهُمْ. They say this word, Ibn Abbas, in one tafsir gave, he mentioned cutting the hair of the head and trimming the nails and wearing the thiyab, the clothing. So all the things you're allowed to do after you finish your Hajj, right? So he says those will count. So Ibn Abbas mentioned in his tafsir, trimming the nails. So they said if you did it, then therefore it's not allowed. But the second group of scholars, they say that it's not so clear, right? Because even though that is the opinion that's mentioned by Ibn Abbas, Imam Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, he mentions that there's nothing clear cut. But Jumhur ulama, majority, they're on their first position. And so therefore it's safer not to touch your nails and come when you're in a state of ihram. That's a safer view. Stay away from it. Okay, because even though that's a tafsir, it's an acceptable. Of course, Ibn Abbas is a great mufassirin, one of the greatest, not the greatest, of the Sahaba in tafsir. The scholars also incline to his interpretation here. So that's the proof for that. Issue 106 now, the Shaykh says, فَفِي ثَلَاثٍ مِنْهَا دَمْ. So now that we learned that you can't touch the hair on the head, the body, you can't trim your nails, the Shaykh now is talking about how much do you have to remove before it becomes a violation or not. So he said, if you take 3 hairs, then you have to play a sacrifice. You have to play the sacrifice expiation. So is that correct or not? He says, ulama here when discussing this, say this is again disputable. And they have different opinions. Where did they get the 3 from? Some of the ulama, they mentioned that this is the ra'yi, the view of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, and also Imam Ahmed, that 3 hairs or more. And others, they said, no, it's not 3 hairs or more. It has to go back to what is prohibited in the verse, which is shaving. So the first opinion, 3 hairs or more. And the second opinion then, no, it has to go back to what was prohibited. What's prohibited? Shaving. And whatever takes its meaning, right? So they said that's the prohibition. That if it has to be that you shaved your head, or you did something that is equivalent to it. And this is important to understand that what's meant by that is because Allah says in the Quran, the person should not shave their head. So that's the prohibition. If you did something like this, you have to also pay the fidyah. And then they bring also the position or the proof that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam told Ka'ab radhiyallahu anhu that when he had lice in his hair, that he could remove it because the ayah came in Surah Baqarah, ayah 196. وَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ بِهِ أَذًى مِنْ رَأْسِهِ. Whosoever in a state of Hajj, ihram, is sick or has in his head a harm, in this case is lice, then this person will remove the hair, but he says, Allah says, مِنْ سِيَامٍ أَوْ صَدَقَةٍ نُسُكٍ. He's going to do fidyah, either fasting or charity or slaughter. So Ka'ab ibn Ujra, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when he saw him and he came to him and said, Rasulullah, that I have this in my hair, he told him to cut the hair and then do the fidyah. So then they said, the scholars then, that shaving, and then the person who has this kind of situation, someone who has to cut it. And that seems to be the closer of the opinion. Closer opinion is the second one, that anyone who cuts the hair, shaves the hair, or cuts it to the level of the person who would cut it if he had a harm in his head. So Imam Malik, this was his wording. The one who has in a state of Umdatul Fiqh, he has to remove something harmful from his head, like he had a lice infestation. He has to remove it, his hair, or a lot of it. So if you get to that level, or you shaved it, that person has to fidyah. Anything less, no fidyah. Is it clear? So 1 hair, 2 hairs, 10 hairs, no. If you get to take enough of hair, it would be like someone who had to take a part of his hair because he had lice or some wound or something, okay, then you're in there. Or you shaved it, okay, you're in there. So here the reason why is because sometimes we'll see hair may fall off your head. 3 hairs, right? That's not much. Sometimes your hair may fall or something happens. Is that enough? So scholars say then it has to come back to the intent behind the ayah. So the qawl, wallahu alam, the qawl sahih then will be the level of shaving or the level of the person who had some harm in his head to which he had to remove a lot of his hair. If you reach that level of taking off, then you have to pay the fidyah. Issue 1007, وفي كل واحد منهما دونها مد طعام وهو ربع صاع. So now the Shaykh is trying to explain to us in terms of what is the fidyah. What is the fidyah? Although it's going to come later. It's going to come later, so maybe we're going to discuss it later in the next chapter. So we're going to just move for a second to what he mentioned after that, because this next part is important. Issue 109 and 110. So let's skip that for a second and come to this. وَإِنْ خَرَجَ فِي عَيْنِهِ شَعْرٌ فَقَرَعَهُ أَوْ نَزَلَ شَعْرُهُ فَغَطَّ عَيْنَيْهِ أَوْ انْكَسَرَ ظُفْرُهُ فَقَصَّهُ فَلَا شَيْء فِيهِ. So the exceptions now, if somebody had a hair fell into his eye to which he had to take it out. Take out the hair. Or somebody had some kind of of his hair, his eyebrows, for example, overgrew and it came into his eyes and he had to remove it. Or his fingernail broke and had to rip it off. Then there's no fidya for such a person. So all those are exemptions. And we can see why. Number one, we already concluded that it has to be what? The person who has 3 hairs or more. I know, the person who has either shaved or the equivalent of someone who had to shave due to sickness. That's the person who has to pay the fidya. So a person who had one hair in his eye, he's not in that category. We already cleared that. As for a person who took off his nail because of a necessity or need, he's not in the same chapter. The ulama, they say the person, in this case, the muhrim, in the state of ihram, he falls in here into the chapter of daf'u sa'il. What is daf'u sa'il? Deflecting the assailant. Right now, someone is in ihram, someone tries to attack you. Ihram, you're not supposed to fight, right? In the state of ihram. What are you going to do? You're going to lay down? Huh? Animal comes chasing you. That's it, khalas shaheed, huh? Now, you have to fight back. So you beat somebody because he attacked you. And daf'u sa'il is generally in Sharia all across the board. You're in your house, someone came in, whatever happens after that, daf'u sa'il. Of course, you can't just kill the guy. There's qawaid, there's rules, but if I deflect him, however I have it, daf'u sa'il, there's no blood money. Deflecting the statement of the chapter in fiqh is very important because it has rules, but also it has implications. Ulama agree bil ijma', the muhrim is allowed to do that. When you say ihram, deflecting harm is not like the one who did harm. So they say now, I ripped my nail, I can cut it off. Because you're the person who's in a state of harm, it suddenly came to you. Something fell into your eyes, you can get it out. So they say that person exempt, he's not in the state where he did it. Like the other person who would cut his hair or shave his head, knowing the ruling, doing it on purpose, being mindful. And we always remember, whenever we talk about these ahkam, the person who did it by accident or was unwary, remember the rule. The person who does any of these prohibitions out of ignorance, or he was forgetful, or he was compelled, there's no fidya. And that's across the board in the Sharia. We keep mentioning this throughout the classes. The rules for someone having to do something, like he nullified the action, the mistake, he has to be aliman, dhakiran, mukhtaran. We always mention the aliman, knowledgeable of the ruling, dhakiran, aware when you're doing it, mukhtaran, willingly doing it. So at the end of the day, we're not talking about someone who, when he's Hajj, suddenly he learned you're not allowed to do this. Because in Hajj, when you go now in the groups, the Hajj guide is kind of like teaching on the way. Kind of for some people, it's on-the-job training. It's not good, right? But someone's you can't do that, and you can't do this. You're like, oh. So we have to be mindful. Sometimes you don't know. But what we don't want someone who doesn't know so many things. Because now look, if someone has, for example, a situation we said, where a person, he did something ignorantly, in this case, let's say he had to shave part of his head due to sickness, it's still fidya. Right? So for the person who has sickness, there's no sin, but there's a fidya. So sometimes this person is ignorant. Ignorance doesn't mean that, right, to a certain degree, in everything you'll be off the hook. So we have to also be mindful that you have to have some knowledge. But the key here is that Sheikh's trying to figure out when and when there's not fidya, because we said that's one of the chapters. Issue now 1011. So now we finished on those about the hair and the nails. الثالث, the third one, لبس المخيط, wearing clothing which is al-makhit. Makhit means clothing designed to cover the body specifically. So clothing we have today, like your shirt, your pants, your qamis, this is called al-makhit. It means the clothing has been designed to specify body parts and limbs, or to fit the body nicely. This is the correct meaning. We already talked about it before, but the term makhit has created issue for a lot of the awam. Because they hear the makhit, they say it means stitched. It doesn't mean stitched. The fuqaha, when they use the term, they were trying to use terminology to figure out to mean like regular clothing. And regular clothing tends to be stitched, hence they use that word. But many ulama said the word is not the best to use now because it causes confusion. Example, people say, can I wear a belt that has stitches? My shoes, my sandals. We're supposed to wear na'alayn, 2 sandals. My sandal has stitches. And that's why the questions they come. Can I wear this? Can I wear that? So many Mashaykh say most questions that come on this angle is the terminology misunderstood. So what does it mean, makhit? It means any clothing. صُنِعَ عَلَى قَدْرِ عَضْلٌ, and it's been created to fit a particular body part, or عَلَى قَدْرِ بدن, or to fit your body proportionately. So today your qamis you're wearing for the men, this is considered makhit because it covers your body limbs, both hands are clear, and then the rest of it will cover your body normally. Compare that to the rida wal izar, which doesn't cover your body. And that's the whole point of it, right? You're going for Hajj is different. So that's why when you're going for Hajj, the rida, sometimes it falls. It doesn't cover perfectly. But this is considered not mekhir. So this is the terminology the ulama are using. And so therefore, wearing in a state of ihram is not allowed to clothing like this. But there are some exceptions. This is what the Shaykh is trying to highlight now. The general ruling is not allowed. But Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us when you state of ihram, you have to remove لا يلبس القميص, you don't wear the قمص, the qamis that we know, ولا عمائم, nor turbans, ولا سراويليات, nor pants, etc. So the hadith is very clear about what you can or cannot wear. So now the Shaykh says, issue 112, إلا أن لا يجد إزارا فيلبس سراويل. Except if someone cannot find any izar, like a lower wrap, then he can wear regular pants. Sarawil here is the pants, not the ones we have today with pockets and stuff, but like the sunnah pants you usually wear underneath your qamis, that kind of sarawil. So sarawil just means kind of clothing that the legs are distinct. One leg and the second leg. So if you don't have an izar, you can wear the sarawil, the pants. And the scholars then say, how do you wear it then? Because you couldn't find it. But let's say, the example, someone has found it, but it's in his luggage. Okay, so example, you left your ihram clothing in the luggage. It's checked in. It's Jeddah. I'm in the airport. I'm in the airplane. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to take off my qamis. Hopefully I have pants, inshallah. Right? You put your qamis over your top. Eyes rida, khalas. You do your talbiyah and you're good to go. When you get to the airport, you get your luggage, then you change. Why? Because that state you were unable. But someone has nothing, can't find any of it, then he just keeps going like this. Because he's different, he doesn't have. That's what hadith says. فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ إِزَارًا فَإِنْ يَلْبَسَ السَّرَاوِيلِ. If you can't find izar, then you wear pants. Hadith Bukhari Muslim. So that's what the scholars they mention, if you can't find. But if you can't find temporarily, until you can find. But if you keep going, then they say, alayhi fidya. Right? Because this person did it deliberately. So for example, your luggage is there, you checked it in, you take it to the hotel, you're still wearing it, you go on like this. No, they say this is not allowed. Then the issue after that, the Shaykh says, issue 1013, أو لا يجد نعلين. We can't find any sandals. فيلبس خفين. So he wears فيلبس خفين. He wears 2 leather socks. ولا فدية عليه. And there's no expiation needed for that person. So here the ulama discussed in the next part of the hadith, if you cannot find, Nabi doesn't command it, if someone cannot find na'alayn, sandals, then he takes the khuf and he wears that. And some of the hadith mention وَلْيَقْطَعْهُمَا, that he cuts them min asfali ka'bayn, underneath the ankles. Which raises the question now, does it have to be under or not? The shoes or the khuf? And it's the issue the scholars they discuss. So let's first look at the first example. I can't find any sandals. I'm wearing my khuf, my leather socks. Khuf is a leather sock. If it's not leather, it's called a jawrab. That's a cotton sock. Right? So jawrab, cotton, khuf, leather. So when we talk to masah al-khufayn, it's not only masah al-khufayn, masah al-ha'il, all leg gear, foot gear. Because we always say qawl sahih, it's not had to be leather, right? So different. Here we're saying that when you travel in time of Sahaba, you used to wear khuf. They were the amal al-salaf. Because the khuf is thick. It's kind of, you can walk on it. It's kind of like a sandal. So that's why when they're traveling, they have the khuf. So you can't find shoes. What do? You take the khuf and you cut it. So now it looks kind of like a sandal and you wear that. The bottom is strong enough to go and protect your feet. But here, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he commanded the cutting of the khuf below the ankle, the scholars say that was in initial days of Islam or the rulings of Hajj. This is the initial days. As for latter time, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam abrogated that. And that's the qawl sahih. If you're wearing khuf, you don't have to cut it. You don't have to. And the scholars say because the hadith Ibn Umar is talking about cutting it, this was in Medina. وحديث Ibn Abbas في العرفة, and it doesn't mention cutting. Now, what do we know about Usul al-Fiqh? Mustalah al-Hadith, Brother Majid taught us. Abrogation, right? So how can we abrogate this hadith? How did he reach that conclusion? Hadith Ibn Umar was in Medina. Nabi gave this ruling. Then later when he went for Hajj himself, the Arafah, and he talked about what you can wear. He didn't talk about cutting the shoe, the khuf there. So Ibn Abbas's hadith then is dated later, Arafah, And we know Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made Hajj what year? Who made the first Hajj? Who led the Sahaba in the first Hajj? Abu Bakr. And then Nabi, and so he sent Abu Bakr, Ali, and others. And then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came in the last Hajj, the only one Hajj he did, and he's leading. At that time, he didn't talk about cutting the khuf. So they said this hadith latter, the abrogates the earlier, and that's the more correct view. Hence, if someone's wearing khuf, he doesn't have to cut it. But that leads them to the next issue the Shaykh says, or he mentioned, which is the na'alayn. And scholars then say, what about if somebody's wearing shoes, sandals? Can the sandals be covering a lot of the foot? Like, we have leather socks, it covers the whole foot. But now we have some sandals, the front is covered, the back is exposed. Some of them are higher, cover the ankle. Some of them are lower. What kind of sandals are you going to wear? The Jumhur ulama, majority of the scholars have the view that you should stay away from ones that cover the ankles. Safer to avoid. And it shouldn't cover the majority of the foot. That's the majority view. Abu Hanifa and his madhab, rahimahullah, he held the view that if it covers majority of the foot, it's permissible. Because Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam talked about wearing the khuf, and that covers majority of the foot. So some sandals, you see them, most of the front foot is covered. I don't know what the name of that sandal is, right? But the one we just slip it on, the back is exposed, the front is covered. Kandora or something like this, I don't know what the name is. Those kind of shoe. That one, it looks like a khuf, half of it, but the other half is exposed. And many of the sandals we wear, the slip-ons, their front and the back are open. And some of the straps, most of the shoes open. So Abu Hanifa held the view, it's all out. And Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah agreed with him in that. And this seems to be, Allahu A'lam, a strong view, but safer to avoid it. Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he says, if someone's wearing footgear in Hajj, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, whoever can find shoes can wear the khuf. So if the khuf is a substitute for the shoe, and the khuf covers most of the foot, then it's permissible to wear any footgear. Therefore, any kind of footgear is allowed. All the ni'al, shoes you can think of, mutlaqah, unrestrictedly. So that's allowed, but the safer is to just do the regular sandals you find today, slip-ons, it's below the ankle. This is the safest. This, again, going out of the khilaf, and also because most footgear is already available like that anyways. And inshallah, we'll cover just one more here. Issue 1014. Al-Rabi'u, the fourth issue that is not allowed when you stay al-Ihram, Taqdiyatul Ra's. Taqdiyatul Ra's, to cover the head. And 1015, Wal-Udhanani minhu, and the ears. To summarize this issue, the scholars say when you stay al-Ihram, you're not allowed to cover your head. But covering the ears, there's no proof for it. So we'll take that one up. There's no explicit proof for that. But for the head, there are. And scholars categorize covering the head into 6 different categories. Right? There's a lot of categories. But maybe inshallah, we'll try to cover that next time, because there's a difference between covering the head, and we need to explain that in more detail, because it happens a lot. People go for Hajj or Umrah, you see them when they're in the bus, it's getting cold, somebody's putting the ihram on his head. He doesn't know. Right? So AC is blasting on his head. He didn't know. Or he did it by accident, or he fell asleep. You cover your whole, can you do that? In the hotel, you cover the whole blanket on your head. Some people you see doing that. Some people you see them underneath the neck. Some of us, we don't care, right? We're so tired. Right? So in these kinds of issues, we have to explain the categories. But one issue that related to the last one, maybe we'll finish with this because of time. Ulama say, okay, when you're wearing the izar with rida with izar in Hajj, can you button and fasten it with clips? This is a very common question that people ask. So you're tying them. So you see some people that have clips, or they have needles, pins. The scholars say for the izar, most scholars permit it. The lower garment, out of fear of exposing the awra, if someone that has that fear, it's allowed. As for the rida, you have some people that have like a pin, it covers like this. Scholars say here, Allahu a'lam, there's no evidence to prohibit it, but better to avoid it. Because ultimately the izar will fall, the rida will fall here and there, but you just put it back. But some people, they excessively pin it. They say if excessively, it's not allowed. Because then it's going to become what? It's going to become like that's fixed on your body. And it's going to be designed. It's supposed to be not fitting your body perfectly. So if you put one on, or a couple on the lower garment, or one here, it's not prohibited. And you find many ulama contemporary scholars who are more lenient in this, and this is correct. There is no prohibition. Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah held that view, but it's better to avoid it for the rida, the top garment. As for the lower garment, if someone fears that, they can do that, or they can wear a belt. And you wear the belt and you just make sure you tie it nicely. Inshallah, there won't be any prohibition. Because the origin is a prohibition needs nas, we need proof. We said there's 9, we can't add 10, 11, 12 without dalil. Inshallah, we'll end with this much. Anyone has any questions, inshallah ta'ala, we'll take it. Yes. So someone's combing hair and the beard in state ihram. We said that according to the correct opinion, since it's not going to be a lot of hair falling, inshallah it doesn't. But to avoid it is safer too, right? Because ultimately, you don't want to go in the gray area. Because some of the scholars have said 3 or less or more. But since it's not what's intended by it, inshallah there's no prohibition. The same if somebody was making wudu, and some hair fell here and there. There's not, and you're not going to count the hair either, right? Right? So inshallah it doesn't, but if you're scared, avoid it. Because sometimes in state ihram, some stuff you don't have to be doing. Sometimes you find people, the state comes, he's doing extra things. Maybe he's doing something he shouldn't be doing. He's supposed to be doing ibadah. Right? So, but you're right. If based on what we mentioned, Qawl Sayyid, inshallah, doesn't harm. Allahu A'lam. Yes. So, peeling skin and scabs, some of the scholars connected, because we know that just like when it comes to Salah Dhul Hijjah, you're not allowed to pull the skin. So, avoiding that is safer. But again, like we said, if it was the ayah and surah, Hajj is where the scholars, they expand the meaning, some of them. So generally avoiding it is better, but again, to be specific, we need nas, we need something clear, or at least a dalil. But the point is, if somebody is doing out of pain, or somebody did by accident, inshallah, these are not, we're talking about deliberately doing that. Because sometimes you find someone doing that because it's a need, he got cut. It's different, right? We're talking about someone who's just, doing all this. Again, that's different, right? But it's better to avoid these things, wallahu a'lam. But again, we can't say definitive unless we have a text. Any other quick questions? Yes. Say it again. So if the slippers kind of fit the foot, it's exempted. It's fine, yeah. So the foot gear is different than the clothing one. Because the scholars say when the Prophet spoke about the foot gear, all he mentioned was cutting it below the ankle and abrogated. So then it's unrestricted. So you can wear tight-fitting ones. And this is for the men. As for the women, what do? They wear the regular shoes and they wear socks. It's a different story here. So sometimes some people are talking, this is ahkam al-rijal. We're going to see later ahkam al-nisa a little bit different. So this is for the men. For the men. Any last questions? Yes. So we're going to get to the Bab al-Fidya later. So like I said, the Fidya has special rules and how you do it and time period you do it in. So all that's coming in the next chapter. So next week, we'll try to finish the prohibitions and then the Fidya. The Fidya will have more detail. طيب, shall we end with this much? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.